This week, Donald Trump's border czar announced that the administration would be winding down its operation that has seen 3,000 ICE agents swarm Minneapolis, arresting thousands and fatally shooting 2 American citizens. The images of brutality by masked federal agents during the surge were shocking. What's behind the retreat, and what does it say about the current administration? Joining me now to discuss is New York Times opinion columnist Ezra Klein, who wrote an excellent recent column titled, "Trump Has Overwhelmed Himself." So, Ezra, we're all looking at the sort of dynamic of the second Trump administration, which seems very different from the first. And you point out that there is a kind of blizzard of very provocative actions going on. What do you think the strategy here is, and is it working?
From the beginning of the second Trump administration, there's been this idea of muzzle velocity. That comes from a Steve Bannon interview from 2019, where he says, look, all we have to do is move so fast and do so many things that our opposition, be that the Democrats, be that the media, be that civil society, can never find its footing. And that's really what they have tried to do. They are constantly on the move. Every day is a completely new story. I feel like right now covering this, you have weeks where we have 3 stories that should have taken months to cover and understand and process in another administration. The problem with muzzle velocity, though, and this is something I wrote at the beginning of Trump's second term, is that you overwhelm yourself. You're not just overwhelming everybody else. The White House has limited bandwidth, and unlike the rest of us, they don't just have to pay attention to things, they actually have to manage events, they have to be in control of them, they have to shape them, they have to drive them. And what they have is no real traditional policy process. They have a lot of different arms acting without anybody really knowing what's going on, without people conducting proper oversight, and a lot of it is blowing up in their face and in the country's face, sometimes as in Minnesota with tragic consequences, sometimes as with the tariffs, they're just raising prices, destroying their own numbers on affordability, but not actually achieving anything. There's a lot happening, but when you kind of step back from the illusion of control and the illusion of velocity, you realize that they're having to back off on a lot of things. They're creating a lot of scandals and problems for themselves. Donald Trump is unpopular. Republicans are losing elections all across the country. This is not an administration where their strategy of management and prioritization and execution is succeeding.
So you put it very well, Ezra. So the puzzle then is, as these numbers are going down, why do they persist? They do scale back a little. And I have a theory I want to ask you if you agree with it, which is Trump seems to have decided that his resurrection after January 6th, after losing to Biden, came about because he stuck with his base. Trump seems to think this is his secret power, that he stays with the base and the base never leaves him. And that's why he seems to be doing all these things that, as you point out, are getting very unpopular. I mean, he's way underwater in almost every issue, including immigration. So to me, the puzzle is, why is a guy who is normally very attentive to 2 things, stock markets and polls, still doing stuff that is very unpopular? And could it be what I'm talking about?
Let me meet your theory with another speculative theory. I have a theory that the Trump administration is the opposite of the Biden administration. Joe Biden, by late in his presidency particularly, was no longer a capable communicator. And his inability to lead the conversation, to communicate in public, to do the public leadership the president needs to do, created the impression that no one was actually in charge at the White House. But my reporting on the Biden White House is that there was a quite traditional policy process that the president was ultimately presiding over. I think the Trump administration is the opposite of that. I think Trump is such an aggressive, constant, and capable public communicator, whenever you think of that public communication, that he gives an impression of being in control that Biden was not able to give. But his White House does not have a clear policy process. I don't think that he is presiding over things in the same way that other presidents typically have. And as such, I think that a lot is happening that is not running really through the preferences of even Donald Trump. Trump's second term is full of highly ideological loyalists who are extremely good at manipulating Donald Trump himself through flattery, extremely good at manipulating Donald Trump himself by telling him what he wants to hear. People actually running things like Stephen Miller are hardcore ideologues who have the president's trust and know how to talk to him. But What they really want to do is not remain on the right side of public opinion. They're not sensitive to the whim and will of the public in the way that Trump, the showman, is. They have a hardcore ideological agenda, often a very extreme agenda, and they are pushing that agenda. If Trump now says no to them, they will stop. But they're very good at making it so he doesn't say no to them. And so Trump is like the ceremonial head of this administration. And I'm not saying he's never involved, but the degree to which we see him on our television, I think, is in some sense inversely related to the actual level of control and participation he has in his White House.
But why do you think Trump is very sensitive to something like the stock market, right? He must be looking at these polls. Why do you think he isn't changing course?
I don't think he is that sensitive to the stock market. I don't disagree with you that he is sensitive to at least parts of his base. But how good the information he's getting is, which polls he is seeing and being fed. There is a fair amount of reporting that one reason he got very involved around Minneapolis was that he happened to not be in Mar-a-Lago that weekend because he was in D.C. for the premiere of the Melania documentary. And so he was talking to different people than he would normally talk to and getting a different sense of what was happening than he might normally get. I think it is easy to assume that Trump's habits are, and particularly the structure around him, is giving him a full sense of what's going on. But I'm not sure that's an assumption we should be making. I think a lot of people are feeding him bad information. That is not to say, I want to be very clear about this, that Donald Trump does not support what his own administration is doing, or that if he was getting good information, he'd be making good decisions. I don't think either of those things are true. But I don't think that he is so on top of things that he is in a day-to-day way paying minute attention to what's going on. I think he's got a lot of advisors telling him everything is going great. This is the most successful administration in history. You're on top of the world. I think to some degree he believes the people flattering him.
Next on GPS, how can the Democrats take advantage of Trump's unpopularity? I'll ask Ezra that next. And we are back with Ezra Klein of the New York Times. So Ezra, then let's talk about the Democrats, because this does seem like it's not going so well for Republicans, particularly looking at the midterm elections. But the Democrats do have the capacity to still blow this. How should the Democratic Party play what appear to be Trump's growing weaknesses?
Look, Democrats have a couple of different problems right now. One, which is going to be in the near term, there's a lot of things Donald Trump is not doing very effectively. What he is doing effectively is raising money, because he has turned his administration into a pay-to-play operation and is getting huge amounts of cash from donors, from people who want his administration's favor, from anybody with business that in any way touches a decision the federal government makes. Trump has been very, very clear that the way you get favorable decisions is you donate to his various initiatives. And so the Republicans are raising a ton of money, much, much more than the Democrats right now. So that's going to be one advantage they have going into the midterms. The Democratic Party's brand is also just quite bad. That remains an unpopular party. I think in a new CNN poll, or a poll I saw on CNN, you have a record number of Americans saying it's too liberal, which surprised me because the party is not doing anything particularly liberal at this moment, but their leadership is not proving that capable of changing the narrative around them. So they're going to have to run very, very effective candidates, and particularly in places like Alaska, where they have a very good candidate, Kansas, Iowa, etc., that fit those states and give them the chance of winning back the Senate. The one saving grace for the Democratic Party right now is that the midterms are very likely to be an aggressive referendum on Donald Trump. And so far what we are seeing in basically every election that happened in 2025 and early intimations of 2026 is that when there is an opportunity for people to come out to vote, Trump's base is not really coming out. And the people who are affronted, offended, frightened by what he is doing are coming out. So the Democratic Party can have a lot of problems, but Donald Trump, to the extent the election is about him, might solve a number of those problems for them.
But what about the dilemma that you see? I mean, you say that the poll says most Americans think the Democrats are too liberal. And I think this comes out of, people hear things like abolish ICE. Now, these are being said by particular individual Democrats, but it does feel like what ends up happening is the energy of the Democratic Party is on the left, is on a kind of populist left, defund the police, abolish ICE. the path to electability is in the mainstream, but there isn't excitement and energy there. What to do about that?
I'm not exactly sure that's true. I mean, I don't think the Democratic Party is talking about defunding the police. I do understand the people that both abolish ICE makes sense to a lot of people. I mean, ICE is completely out of control, and I've also seen the polling suggesting that's not popular. I think this does come down to candidates. One thing I am seeing across the country right now is there is a huge amount of energy behind individual candidates who, for one reason or another, are catching people's imagination, even if they're not all that liberal, right? So James Tallarico, who's running for Senate in the Democratic primary in Texas right now, is a good example of this. Mary Patola in Alaska is maybe an example of this. Rob Sand, who's running for governor in Iowa and is like a moderate Democrat who thinks we should not have a two-party system, is an example of that. He had a huge fundraising haul at the beginning here. So the Democratic Party, until it has new national leadership, is not going to be able to dramatically change its national brand. That's going to be a big problem for candidates who are running in states where that brand is quite poor. But that puts all the more pressure on finding candidates who fit those states. And so the perception of the Democratic brand can be an anchor for these candidates, or if they're willing to run against it and have high-profile defections and pick fights with it, it could be an advantage for them because it gives them something to run against. They're running against the Republicans on the right, and they're running against the Democratic Party brand, or at least the parts of it that their constituents don't like, on the left. Now that's tough, it's tricky, it's politics people don't do as often anymore as they once did, but it is by no means impossible, and certainly the National Democratic Party should be giving a lot of help to the kinds of, and putting a lot of energy into finding the kind of recruits who can do that successfully. If Democrats are going to win, they're going to need to win in places that have voted for Donald Trump. That's going to mean not running like a Democrat in a place that votes heavily against Donald Trump.
Ezra Klein, thank you. Fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
As we approach the 4-year anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, are U.S.-led peace talks turning into business deals? I'll ask Ann Applebaum of The Atlantic when we come back.